Well, hello everyone. This is my final presentation of this unit, Teaching English Through Translation, taught by teacher Adrian Castañon. I found this subject to be very interesting because I have used translation throughout my teaching experience, and I had never used the process he suggested that I will talk about a little later, which I will talk about a little later in this presentation. So I'm going to be talking about this subject to close as the closing activity. All right, so as an introduction, translation has always been very important throughout history, beginning with the Egyptians in the year 3100 BC, when they used translation as different languages from slaves and from noble people. So translators were already of great help in the development of languages, shaping national identities and forming scholarships. Through the ages, translation and translators were there to help societies around the globe move forward. One of the most influential translators was Saint Jerome, who translated the first Bible used by Catholics from Hebrew to Greek. So this Bible is still used nowadays. There are different models of translation, which I will present. For example, the first one is the linguistic model from our structuralistic approach. This focuses in resources of source language and target language and mechanisms of target language. So it's very important to pay attention to these two aspects of translation because we need to know what source language has or what the resources they use and how to change them so that they fit the mechanisms of the target language. The text-to-linguistic model takes into account various uses of language by speakers and writers. It uses top-down processes. It uses target language resources in a forceful way. Communicative values of source language are transferred to target language, and translator engages in textual processes of transfer and text production. The sociocultural translation model was invented by Lawrence Venti in 1995. It emphasizes the culture of source language in translations. So he says that translation should be read as translation. So he's against fluency in target language because then it would appear like it is a text originally written in the target language. This model is also called restive or resistant translation, and it is difficult for readers to understand. Personally, I think this model is not used anymore nowadays because of the characteristics it had. It tried to respect the source language so that it wouldn't modify anything in the target language. The computational model is nowadays the most commonly used, since we find our students mainly use like the translator or translating tools we can find online. This is, of course, computer-assisted translation. It's made by a machine. And the computer should actually be a tool for translators, but it shouldn't be like the whole thing. Of course, it has some good features that can help us with when translating, like terminological and lexical assistant, encyclopedic knowledge, translation strategic assistant, and document management assistance. So we could use this, but just as a tool. The psycholinguistic model focuses on understanding of the source language, transcoding the source language into target language, and formulating the target text. So I personally think this is the model that we use the most, since we do transcode the source language into the target language, and finally we get a result a target text as the final product. And there are, of course, different interdisciplinary models. They focus on the linguistic system, the world knowledge, and the meaning systems. Some translating strategies that we can use are mentioned by Vasquez Ayora. These are transposition, modulation, equivalence, adaptation, explicitation, omission, and compensation. And of course, we need to be aware of the culture and specific ways of speaking the target language, so that we can produce an accurate text in the target language, and especially one that is appropriate to their culture. In the critical approach, we have two differences. One that is a literary criticism of translations, which criticize the translation per se, and the translation criticism, which is when the translation is judged on its own merits as a target language text and not as a translation. The translation theory today focuses mainly with translation criticism. So it uses, or it sees the text that has been translated as the target text, a comparison of source language and target language versions, and finding mistakes. So what we have to consider, what do we want to preserve in a target text, or what is the source text? What is in the source text? And then, do we have to disappear all foreign values? Is everything of value bound to its linguistic form? Can information content be separated from linguistic and textual form? So these are questions we need to ask ourselves when we are working in translation. And we can have these two different types of translation: the cover translation, which is one that is not marked as a translated text of a source, and the over translation, which takes into account different cultural presuppositions in the two language communities. So these are two different kinds of translations we can have. We need to take into account pragmatics of the source language as well as the target language, and adapt them to the target language so that we can have a comprehensible text. The translator, of course, must have some competences, like, first of all, knowledge of the two language systems, communicative knowledge in the two language system, and the translation competence, that it's everything a translator needs to know and knowing to do it in order to translate. So it's not an easy task, and not everyone can do it. For this reason, nowadays, teaching translation has become very important, because many professionals want to learn how to translate, like lawyers, doctors, or people in any field. Now, translators need to focus on the practical aspects of total proficiency in their source language and in the target language, together with the techniques used in translation. Then, for interpreters, interpreting skills have to be acquired before entering professional activities. So these are two different things. Some difficulties we can find when translating are the lack of proficiency in the target language, lack of proficiency in the source language, and lack of intercultural competence or sensitivity. Translation can be used as a tool nowadays. Translation is a scale of interpretation and re-expression based on knowledge of language and facts, according to Delise, 1988. Some advantages of using translation in the classroom are checking on accuracy, awareness of content and form, cognitive and psychological reasons that can help our students. We also can use translation in the classroom because it helps students understand what an item means. It makes students cognitive awareness of English compared to their own language. And well, many students translate anyway, so why not formalizing it? And it could help them. Although it's important to mention that we shouldn't overuse translation. For the process of translation, we have to take some or pay attention to some factors, which are the communicative function, the target language textual style, the potential audience, and the host cultural linguistic system. Now for this, we practiced in this subject one particular process of translation, which was suggested by our teacher. And in this one, we have to work with 3 lines, like make 2 drafts. First, we have the source language, then the literal translation we do really quickly without stopping and thinking a lot of what we're translating, and the final rendering where we actually take into account all the aspects we already mentioned, like culture and specific use of the target language. Of course, there are many traps and pitfalls that we can fall into, we can produce in translation, and these can be very long sentences, ambiguity, redundance, wrong register, neologisms, untranslatable terms, etc. So we need to be very careful when we're translating and pay attention not to make those mistakes. So finally, translating and interpreting requires skills that need to be learned, not only source language and target language must be dominated, but the 2 cultural systems must be dominated as well. So as I said at the beginning of this presentation, I found this subject to be very interesting and useful for our teaching practice, our everyday teaching practices. We must keep in mind to consider the cultural aspects of translation, and we mustn't completely forget about translation in our classrooms, but also we mustn't abuse of it. We should use it just as a tool to help us and our students. Thanks a lot.